How do you live a normal life when your last name is synonymous with the worst crimes in human history? I want you to really just sit with that question for a second. We spend thousands of hours analyzing the architects of the Third Reich. The generals, the ideologues, the men standing on the podium screaming into microphones.
Right, the monsters themselves.
Exactly. But then May 1945 hits. The 1,000-year Reich collapses in a matter of days. And the architects are either dead, arrested, or, running for the rat lines.
And the lights go out on the regime, the stage is dismantled, but the story doesn't actually end there.
No, it doesn't. They left people behind. And I'm not talking about the anonymous citizens who claim they didn't know.
No.
I'm talking about the children, the little princesses and crown princes who were, bouncing on Hitler's knee in propaganda photos on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday, their fathers are the most hated men on the planet.
It is a fascinating and, frankly, a deeply disturbing angle of history that often gets glossed over in the standard textbooks.
It really does.
We are peeling back the curtain on the domestic lives of monsters. To do this, we've pulled a specific stack of sources for this deep dive. We're looking at biographies like Children of Nazis by Tanya Kresniansky, the extensive interview work by Gerald Posner in Hitler's Children.
That one's incredible.
It is. And we've also got some very dense reports on everything from the internal politics of Spandau prison to the psychological trauma assessments of these families.
And the mission for this deep dive is pretty specific.
Yeah.
We aren't here to recite dates of battles. We are looking for what I call the intellectual gossip of the Nazi progeny.
I like that term, intellectual gossip.
We're looking at family secrets, severe psychological trauma, and these wildly divergent paths these kids took. You have some who went into total denial, some who tried to atone, and some who went down these deep rabbit holes of conspiracy.
Yeah, the sources paint a picture that is closer to a psychological horror film than a history documentary. That is really the tone here. It is the horror of the bloodline.
So let's unpack this. To really understand what the survivors faced, the ones who had to live with a name, we actually have to establish a baseline. We have to look at the family that didn't make it out. We have to talk about the Goebbels family.
The ultimate fanatics. You can't understand the survivors without understanding the alternative. This is the control group for the psychological experiment, if you will.
Right. Joseph and Magda Goebbels.
Sure.
Now, if you look at the newsreels from the late 30s and early 40s, this was the picture-perfect Aryan family. They were marketing tools.
We were the model. They appeared in over 30 newsreels. You see them singing for their father's birthday, playing in the garden, helping their mother. It was so calculated.
And they were used for a specific purpose, right? It wasn't just happy family stuff.
Oh, no. It was targeted. They were used specifically to contrast against the disabled children in propaganda films promoting the T4 euthanasia program. So on one hand, you see the perfect Goebbels children. And on the other, you see propaganda designed to dehumanize those the regime deemed unworthy of life. They were the biological centerpieces of the Reich.
Which makes the end just so much more chilling. May 1945, the Russians are in Berlin, the family is in the Führer bunker, and Magda Goebbels, the psychology here is terrifying. She refused to have the children smuggled out, correct?
She did. And this wasn't for lack of opportunity. Albert Speer, the armaments minister, offered to get them out. Pilot Hannah Reich offered to fly them out. She refused every single time.
Why?
Her mindset, and this is critical to understanding the fanaticism, was that a world without National Socialism was not a world worth living in. But it goes deeper than just political loyalty. She actually believed in reincarnation.
Reincarnation. That seems, I don't know, at odds with the typical Nazi pseudoscience. Maybe it fits right in.
It sort of fits the mystical, cult-like side of it. She convinced herself that by killing her children, she was saving them.
Saving them.
Yes. She believed she was allowing them to be reborn in a better future life. It wasn't murder in her eyes. It was a rescue mission. She was terrified that if they survived, they'd be paraded by the Soviets or raised as anti-fascists, which to her was a fate literally worse than death.
That is, it's just hard to process that level of delusion. So, May 1st, 1945. They are in the bunker.
Yeah.
How does this actually go down? Because the details in the sources are nightmarish, and they dispel this idea that they just went to sleep.
No, it's a scene of absolute horror. The 6 children, Helga, Hildegard, Helmut, Holdine, Hedwig, and Heidrun, were told they were getting vaccinations. Because they would be in the bunker for a long time. They were given morphine injections first.
And Magda didn't do this alone.
No, she couldn't bring herself to do the initial injections. She had help. An SS dentist named Helmut Kunz administered the morphine. Once the children were unconscious, or mostly unconscious, Magda came back in. Likely assisted by Hitler's personal doctor, Ludwig Stumpfegger, she crushed cyanide capsules in their mouths.
There's one detail in the autopsy reports that always sticks with me. It's about the eldest, Helga.
Yes. Helga was 12. She was smart. She was perceptive. Her father had noted in his diary how bright she was. The autopsy found significant bruising on her face and body.
So she fought back.
The implication is that the morphine didn't work fast enough, or she woke up, she realized what was happening, she resisted. It wasn't the peaceful sleep Magda wanted to believe it was a struggle against her own mother.
Unbelievable. And then, after murdering 6 of her own children, Magda does something that feels like it belongs in a scripted drama, not real life. She combs their hair.
She did. She arranged them in their beds, combed their hair, and placed them to look like they were sleeping peacefully. It was a final act of maternal performance. She curated the death scene before going up to the garden to commit suicide with her husband.
It sets such a grim baseline. This is what the true believers did.
Yeah.
But there was a survivor in that family orbit, wasn't there?
Yes, Harold Quandt. He was Magda's son from her first marriage. He was a prisoner of war in North Africa when the bunker fell, so he wasn't there to be saved by his mother.
And his path was completely different.
Completely. He inherited a massive industrial fortune from his father, Günther Quandt. We're talking about the capital behind BMW and Daimler.
So a huge industrial empire.
A huge one. Harold became one of the wealthiest men in West Germany. While his half-siblings were being murdered in the bunker for ideology, he went on to become a titan of post-war industry. It's just a stark contrast of that era.
It really highlights the fork in the road, doesn't it? You die for the name or you survive. And, well, that brings us to our next subject. Someone who survived but went in a direction no one, and I mean no one, saw coming. We need to talk about Martin Bormann Jr.
The Crown Prince, or Krenzi as he was called.
Exactly. Martin Bormann, the father, was Hitler's private secretary, the gatekeeper. By the end of the war, he was arguably the second most powerful man in the Reich.
Yeah.
If you wanted access to Hitler, you went through Bormann.
You did.
And his son, Martin Jr., was Hitler's first godson.
Born in 1930, he was steeped in the ideology from birth. He was literally named after Hitler Martin Adolf Bormann. But the domestic reality wasn't this warm, fuzzy Nazi loyalty. His father was severe.
Oh yeah, there's that one story the sources mentioned that perfectly encapsulates the atmosphere in the Bormann house. Martin Jr. once saluted his father.
Right.
He gave him the Hail Hitler.
He did. He said, "Hail Hitler." And his father, Martin Bormann Sr., slapped him across the face. He screamed at him that the correct address for him, the father, was, "Heil mein Führer."
Wait. He wanted his son to address him as Führer?
No, it's a bit confusing. He was correcting the protocol. He was screaming that he wasn't the Führer, and the boy was being too casual with the salute.
Oh, I see.
But in other accounts, it suggested he wanted the boy to understand the absolute hierarchy, that the father was the conduit to the Führer. It was all about absolute precision and obedience. There was no warmth in that house, just ideology.
So 1945 rolls around. Martin Jr. is 15 years old. The war ends. His father disappears. We know now he died near the Lehrter station. But for a long time, he was a ghost, the most wanted man in the world. What does the Crown Prince do?
He runs. He flees to Austria. And this is where the story just pivots completely. He gets taken in by a Catholic farmer named Nicholas Hohenwerder. Now, you have to remember, Martin Bormann Sr. was violently anti-Christian.
Oh, he hated the church.
Hated it. He viewed it as a direct competitor to Nazism and wanted to dismantle it entirely after the war.
And his son is hiding out in a Catholic farmhouse. The irony.
Precisely. And in that environment, Martin Jr. converts. He becomes a Catholic, but he doesn't just, attend church on Sundays. He joins the Jesuits. He becomes a priest.
The godson of Adolf Hitler becomes a Jesuit priest. That feels like the ultimate rebellion. It's almost too poetic to be real.
You would think so. It creates this incredible narrative arc. He spends years in the Congo as a missionary. He nearly dies in the Simba Rebellion. I mean, he was held at gunpoint, tortured for days. He seems to be the ultimate example of atonement.
He's literally undoing his father's legacy.
Exactly, by serving the very faith his father tried to destroy. For decades, he was the poster child for overcoming the past. He spoke about how his father's evil led him to God.
And this is the intellectual gossip part of our deep dive where the sources get messy. It's not that simple, is it?
No.
There's a twist that comes out much, much later.
This is where it gets complicated and, frankly, quite dark. Martin Jr. eventually leaves the priesthood in the early 70s. He gets into a bad car accident, falls in love with his nurse, a former nun named Cordula, and they marry.
It sounds like a touching story.
A movie script, right.
Hmm.
Redemption, love, a quiet life. Except, near his death in 2013, allegations surfaced. A former student from a Catholic boarding school in Austria came forward. He accused Martin Bormann Jr. of raping him when the student was 12 years old back in the early 1960s.
Whoa. So the man who is supposedly atoning for the sins of the father
is accused of perpetrating his own sins. Other students allege severe physical violence. I'm talking beatings that went far beyond the normal harsh discipline of the time.
So what happened with the case?
Well, because Bormann had dementia, by the time these accusations really came to light, he couldn't be prosecuted. But, and this is a big but, the Klasnick Commission, which is an independent commission investigating abuse in the Austrian church, they paid the accuser compensation. They found the claim credible.
That completely shatters the narrative of the good son, doesn't it?
It challenges us to look deeper. We want a simple story, bad father, good son who rejects him. But trauma is complex, abuse is so often cyclical. The psychological horror here isn't just what the Nazis did, it's what they left inside their children. The son, who tried to run the furthest from his father, literally to the Congo and into the priesthood, may have ended up repeating the patterns of dominance and abuse he learned at home.
It's tragic. It really is. It suggests that you can change the uniform from Hitler Youth to Jesuit robes, but the internal damage is much harder to fix.
Much harder.
So we have the fanatic who murders her kids, the son who tries to atone but maybe becomes a monster himself, and then we have the son who just refuses to believe his father was a villain at all.
Wolf Rudiger Hess.
The son of Rudolf Hess. Now, Rudolf Hess is a bizarre figure in his own right. He flies to Scotland in 1941 on this rogue peace mission, gets arrested, and spends the rest of his life in prison, mostly in Spandau.
Right. And Wolf was only 3 years old when his father flew away. He didn't know him. He had no memory of him as a father figure. He grew up with this myth of the martyr for peace.
And he creates an entire life around this myth that becomes his whole identity.
He was obsessed. He once said, quote, "I never had time for myself. I spent all my free time on my father." He founded the Committee to Free Rudolf Hess. He wrote 3 books defending him. Unlike Bormann Jr., who tried to escape the name, Wolf Rudiger Hess wore it like armor.
He didn't see him as a Nazi leader. He saw him as a victim.
A victim, the only innocent man in the leadership, in his eyes.
And then comes the end. August 1987. Rudolf Hess is 93 years old. He's the only prisoner left in Spandau prison, a massive prison for one old man. And he's found dead in the garden summer house.
The official verdict, suicide by hanging, using an electrical extension cord.
But Wolf isn't buying it. Not for a second.
No. This is where we get into the Spandau conspiracy. Wolf vehemently claimed his father was murdered, specifically by the British Secret Intelligence Service, the SIS.
Okay, why? What was the motive? He's 93 years old. What threat could he possibly pose?
The motive, according to Wolf, was the political climate. It was the glasnost era. Gorbachev was in power in the Soviet Union, and there were rumors that the Soviets, who had always been the ones to block Hess's release...
Right, they were always the strictest.
They were. The rumors were that they were finally going to agree to release him on humanitarian grounds. Wolf argued that the British couldn't afford that.
Because Hess knew too much.
Exactly. The theory is that Hess knew embarrassing secrets about that 1941 peace mission. Maybe that elements of the British government were actually negotiating with him back then. If he got out and spoke, it would rewrite history. So according to Wolf, they silenced him.
And did he have any evidence? Or was this just a son's grief talking?
Well, he had some points he clung to. He argued his father was far too frail to hang himself. Hess had severe arthritis in his hands. The family claimed he couldn't even tie his own shoelaces.
Let alone rig a noose with an electrical cord.
Exactly. How could he hoist himself up? The mechanics are questionable.
That's a compelling detail.
And the suicide note found in his pocket. The family claimed it was actually written 20 years prior, during a different illness, and that the prison authorities just recycled it.
Recycled a suicide note.
That was the claim. And Wolf even commissioned a second autopsy that suggested the marks on the neck were consistent with strangulation, not suspension hanging.
So he dies believing his father was a martyr and a victim of assassination, a total conspiracy.
He does. And the toxicity didn't end with Wolf. This is the multi-generational curse we talked about earlier.
Oh, right.
Wolf Rudiger was immensely pleased, proud, even that his own son, Wolf Andreas Hess, was born on April 20th.
Hitler's birthday.
Hitler's birthday. And Wolf Andreas was later fined for Holocaust denial on the internet. He questioned the existence of gas chambers at Dachau.
So it just keeps going.
It does. You see, the poison didn't stop. It bled from the father to the son to the grandson. It's like a genetic defect of ideology.
That is heavy. It
Yeah.
shows that you can't just wish this stuff away. It lingers.
Yeah.
But then you have the case that I think is the most morally complex. The meeting in Brazil.
Rolf Mengele.
The son of the angel of death, Joseph Mengele, the doctor of Auschwitz.
Rolf was born in 1944. He grew up thinking his father was a war hero who died. He didn't learn the truth until he was 16.
Can you even imagine that day? Finding out your hero father is actually the world's most wanted war criminal,
Right.
responsible for these horrific experiments on children.
No. I mean, what do you do with that information?
And unlike Wolf Hess, Rolf didn't idolize him. He became a lawyer, he was a liberal, he changed his last name to his wife's name to protect his own children. But he maintained contact.
He did. There were letters exchanged through intermediaries for years, and in 1977, Rolf decides he has to know. He has to see him. So he travels to Brazil, using a stolen passport to meet his father in hiding.
This scene is just incredible to visualize.
Yeah.
The liberal, post-war, modern German son meeting the unrepentant Nazi father in a jungle hideout. What was that conversation like? What did they talk about?
It was tense. Rolf wanted answers. He wanted to understand the why. He asked about Auschwitz. He asked about the experiments on twins and Mengele. He was completely defensive, utterly unrepentant.
He didn't think he did anything wrong.
Yeah.
At all.
No. There's a quote from the sources where Mengele asks, "What was I supposed to do with these people? They were sick and half dead when they arrived."
Oh my God.
He claimed he saved thousands by selecting them for work details instead of the gas chambers. He truly viewed the Jewish prisoners as a different species, not human. He had no capacity for empathy.
That must have been horrifying for Rolf to hear.
Yeah.
To look your father in the eye and see that void.
Rolf said later, "I simply rejected everything he presented." He realized his father was incapable of remorse. The gap between them was just unbridgeable.
But here is the kicker. Here is the moral dilemma that I think keeps people up at night. Rolf Mengele hated what his father did. He rejected the ideology, but he knew where Joseph Mengele was.
Yes.
And she never turned him in.
The blood bond. Nazi hunters like Simon Wiesenthal were desperate for that information. Rolf could have ended the search, but he said, "I would never betray my father. No one in the world can ask me to do that."
It's the ultimate psychological horror, isn't it? Protecting a mass murderer because he's your dad.
Yeah. It is. It shows that the primal link of family can sometimes override the moral imperative of justice. Rolf lived with that secret until his father died of a stroke while swimming in 1979. He protected the monster to the very end, even while hating the monster's actions. It's a very uncomfortable reality for us to judge.
It's messy. Humans are messy. And Rolf Mengele is perhaps the most human example of that conflict.
They are. And when you look across the spectrum of these Nazi children, you see every possible coping mechanism.
Right, let's do a quick comparison here, because we've got the priest, the conspiracist, and the silent keeper. But there are others who fall into the extremes.
You have the unrepentant Gudrun Himmler, daughter of Heinrich Himmler.
The Nazi princess.
That was her nickname. Poopy was what her father called her. She kept a scrapbook of him her whole life. After the war, she worked for an organization called Still Hilf Silent Help.
What was silent help?
It was a shadowy organization that supported SS war criminals. She helped them get money, housing, legal defense. She was, in a way, the Mother Teresa for Nazis. She would visit them in prison, bringing chocolates and money.
So she was actively aiding the villains. She never stopped believing.
Until the day she died in 2018. She was a neo-Nazi idol. She attended rallies in Austria. To her, her father was the greatest man who ever lived, and she refused to believe he committed suicide. She claimed murder, just like Wolf Hess.
She lived her entire life in the shadow of 1945.
Completely. And then on the total opposite end of the spectrum, you have Nicholas Frank.
The son of Hans Frank, the Governor General of Poland, the butcher of Poland.
Yes, and Nicholas Frank. He despises his father. There's no other word for it. He wrote a book called Against the Father. It's brutal.
Doesn't he carry a specific photo with him?
He carries a photo of his father's dead body hanging from the gallows at Nuremberg. He looks at it to ensure he is dead. He fears the genetic inheritance of evil. He has spent his entire life trying to destroy his father's memory, tearing down the image of the man who fathered him.
That is such a heavy burden. To carry your father's execution photo just to feel safe in your own skin.
It is.
And then somewhere in the middle of denial and pride, there's Etta Goering.
Hermann Goering's daughter. She lived a life of entitlement. In 2015, at age 76, she actually sued the Bavarian parliament.
Sued them for what?
To get back her father's looted art, specifically a painting, the Cranach Madonna. She considered it her property. She considered her name a source of pride. She never acknowledged the crimes. She just wanted the luxury back.
Talk about intellectual gossip. The audacity to sue for looted art in 2015.
It just shows a complete disconnect from reality, a life lived in a bubble of denial.
So what does this all mean? We've looked at the priest, the conspiracist, the keeper, the princess, the accuser.
Well, if we synthesize this, we see that these children are the final victims of the Third Reich, but in a very specific, twisted way. They were indoctrinated, then shattered. The mission of their lives became reacting to their fathers.
Right.
Some rebuilt, like Bormann, though, with tragic flaws. Some doubled down, like Hess and Himmler. Some just tried to survive the cognitive dissonance, like Mengele.
They were all trapped by the name.
Exactly. They were the collateral damage of their father's egos and evils.
And that brings us to a final thought. We mentioned Wolf Hess's son, the Holocaust denier. And we know about Bettina Goering, Hermann Goering's great niece.
Who sterilized herself.
Right. She had herself sterilized because she didn't want to pass on the blood of a monster.
Which raises the ultimate question for you, the listener. Is trauma genetic? Is evil genetic? Can you ever truly wash the blood off the name?
Or are we all doomed to carry the sins of our fathers, whether we try to atone like Bormann or deny like Hess?
A difficult question.
That is something to think about. This has been a deep dive into the burden of the name. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. I want you to close your eyes for a second and imagine a childhood, but not a normal one. I want you to picture a life that seems like it was ripped straight out of a fairy tale. I mean, the Grimm's kind, but before the ending gets dark.
So a fantasy.
Exactly. Imagine having a literal palace built just for you. A small-scale replica of Sanssouci, the summer palace of Frederick the Great.
Wow.
And it's constructed right in the middle of a sprawling orchard. You have your own miniature theater with real velvet curtains. You're not playing with puppies. You're cuddling pet lion cubs.
Lion cubs. I mean, that's a whole other level of privilege.
It is. And your father, to you, he isn't just dad. He is, well, the most powerful man in the country, a celebrated hero who showers you with diamonds, with art, with unconditional adoration.
It sounds like, as you said, a complete fantasy. Or maybe a distorted fever dream version of a Disney movie. The ultimate bubble.
It is the ultimate bubble, but now we have to zoom out. The orchard is Karen Hall. The father is Hermann Goering. The year is 1940. And while you're staging plays in your private theater, the Europe outside your gates is burning. Your father isn't just a hero, he's orchestrating the machinery of an industrial genocide.
And that is the terrifying cognitive dissonance we're wading into today.
Yeah.
This isn't a deep dive into, war strategy or the politics of the Nazi Party.
No.
Or even the primary architects of the Holocaust. We know those monsters. We know their crimes. Today, we're looking at the people who called those monsters Papa. We are looking at the children of the Nazis.
We have a massive stack of sources here to get through: biographies, dusty legal transcripts from the 1960s, diaries, and some truly cynical reports on the post-war social scene. And the mission today is to answer a question that, honestly, I've struggled with just reading this material. What happens when you're raised as royalty in a house of horrors?
And maybe the more uncomfortable question, what happens when the castle falls? Do you wake up? Do you realize what your life was built on?
Do you deny it?
Or, and this is something we'll see in some truly shocking cases, do you have the audacity to sue the new democratic government to get your looted heritage back?
That legal aspect is where the intellectual gossip element of this deep dive really, really kicks in.
It does.
We tend to think of history as, battles and treaties, but so much of this story is about entitlement, petty feuds, and deep, dark family secrets.
It's the domestic side of evil. We're going to trace these disparate paths, from the Nazi princesses who remained unrepentant to the bitter end, to the children who were so horrified by their bloodline that they literally sterilized themselves to ensure it ended with them.
So let's start where we began, with that surreal royal upbringing. I mentioned the Etta Schlieffen, or Etta's Little Palace. This was built for Etta Goering.
The little princess of the Reich. And we have to understand, that wasn't just some cute nickname used by the tabloids.
No.
It was functionally her title within the inner circle. She was treated like royalty.
The sources describe an existence at Karen Hall that is just. It's hard to wrap your head around. She has this miniature palace, but she also has access to the main estate, which included a 900-meter hunting hall.
900 meters. Just think about that scale.
It's nearly a kilometer. A kilometer of hallway dedicated to hunting trophies. It's megalomania made manifest.
And it's so important to contextualize that entitlement. This wasn't just wealth in the sense of a successful businessman or even, old money aristocracy.
Right.
This was plunder. The art on the walls, the tapestries, the statues in the Garden Karen Hall was essentially a warehouse for the looted heritage of Europe.
But to a child like Etta, it's just home.
It's just home. She's growing up believing her father is this jovial, larger-than-life Renaissance man.
Yeah.
And her godfather, that's Adolf Hitler.
Uncle Adolf.
To her, he's Uncle Adolf. He sends her chocolates, specialized dolls, and written notes.
That's the psychological hook that makes this so difficult to parse. To the world, they are architects of doom. To these kids, they're warm, loving figures.
Absolutely. But before the war ends, while the regime is still at its absolute zenith, there's this incredible social drama playing out behind the scenes.
Yes. We have to talk about the First Lady feud.
This is a slice of history that often gets overlooked because, the sheer scale of the atrocities just drowns it out.
Of course.
But if you look at the inner circle, it was incredibly petty. It was like a high-stakes, fascist version of a royal court drama.
We're talking about the rivalry between Emmy Goering and Eva Braun.
Precisely. On one side, you have Emmy Goering, Herman's second wife. She's a former actress. She's theatrical. She loves the spotlight, the grand entrances.
The center of attention.
Always. And because Hitler is publicly unmarried, married only to Germany, as the propaganda went at, Emmy functions as the de facto First Lady of the Reich.
She was the hostess.
She hosts the diplomatic tea parties. She greets the foreign dignitaries. She basks in that adulation. The sources say she honestly considered herself the Queen of Germany.
And then there's Eva Braun.
Who is essentially a state secret.
Hidden away.
Kept in the shadows, tucked away at the Berghof in the mountains. She has no official standing. She's the mistress.
And that must have driven Emmy crazy.
Oh, the sources indicate there was a vicious, ongoing social war between these two women over protocol. Who enters the room first? Who gets the title? Who sits where at the dinner table?
It's absurd to think about. I mean, millions are dying on the Eastern Front. The gas chambers are running at full capacity. The world is literally on fire.
And these two are fighting over who gets to pour the tea.
It's beyond parody.
It highlights the absolute delusion of that inner circle. They were obsessed with their own status within the hierarchy, completely insulated from the reality of what that hierarchy was actually doing.
They saw themselves as a new aristocracy.
Exactly. Not as political figures, but as a new European nobility. And the critical thing to understand is that for some of them, that sense of aristocratic privilege didn't just vanish when the war ended.
Which brings us to what I think is the most shocking story in our stack today. It completely dismantles the idea that everyone was sorry, or at least humble, after 1945.
Yes. We need to talk about the case of the Madonna and child.
This is the ultimate case study in audacity. If you want to understand the mindset of the loyalists, the ones who never recanted, you have to understand this lawsuit.
So let's set the scene. It's the 1960s. The war has been over for 20 years. The Holocaust is fully revealed. The Nuremberg trials are history.
The world knows. There are no excuses.
The world knows exactly what Hermann Goering did, looting Europe, establishing the Gestapo, authorizing the final solution, and his daughter, Etta, is in court.
And she's not on trial. She's not defending herself.
No, she is the plaintiff.
Unbelievable.
She is suing the government. She wants a painting back. A masterpiece by Lucas Cranach the Elder, the Madonna and Child.
Correct. Now, we have to trace the provenance, the history of ownership of this painting to understand the sheer gall of this request.
Okay.
It was originally given as a baptism gift to Etta in 1938.
A gift from the city of Cologne, officially.
Or rather, a gift that was, let's say, strongly encouraged from the Wallraf Museum by a Nazi mayor who wanted to curry favor with Hermann Goering.
So it was looted.
It was looted from the public trust to hang in a nursery. After the war, the city of Cologne naturally said, "We'd like our masterwork back, please."
And Etta said, "No, it's mine."
She fought them for 15 years. She argued that because it was a personal gift to her as a child, it was her private property, regardless of how her father's friends obtained it.
And here's where it gets really interesting and frankly cynical regarding the post-war German legal system.
Yes.
She actually won the first round.
Wait, she won? in a German court.
In the 50s.
In 1954, a court ruled that her father hadn't technically exerted pressure to get the gift, so it was legally her personal property.
That is baffling. That implies the courts were willing to just completely overlook the coercive nature of the entire Nazi regime.
Well, the post-war German legal system was complicated.
To put it mildly, many judges were holdovers from the old regime. It wasn't a clean slate. It took until 1968 for the Federal Court of Justice to finally overturn that ruling and return the painting to the museum.
1968, that's a long time.
But just pause and consider the mindset of the plaintiff here. You are the daughter of a man convicted of crimes against humanity. Your entire inheritance is built on the bones of Europe. And you are using the democratic legal system, a system your father sought to destroy, to reclaim stolen property because you genuinely believe you are the victim.
It's complete lack of a moral compass. It suggests that, to her, the crime wasn't the theft or the genocide. The crime was that the government took her stuff.
And she never let go of that. Our sources point out that in 2015, she's 76 years old at this point, she petitioned the Bavarian parliament again.
No.
Yes. She wanted compensation for her father's expropriated legacy.
In 2015, decades after reunification.
In 2015, the petition was unanimously rejected, thankfully, but she went to her grave feeling like the German government had robbed her.
That is, I'm at a loss for words. It just connects so perfectly to this narrative of victimhood they all seem to adopt immediately after 1945.
It really does. You read about Camp Ashken and their lives right after the surrender, and the tone is always, look how hard we have it.
Right, the fall. You have Emmy and Etta, who had been living in this just obscene opulence, suddenly in a U.S.-controlled hotel in Luxembourg Camp Ashken.
Which was basically an upscale prison camp for the elite.
It was. But then, after the trials, the real reality sets in. They're living in a cabin. No electricity, no running water, a two-room apartment later.
And the narrative becomes, we suffered, too.
Exactly. The mothers, Emmy Goering, Margaret Himmler, they spun this story to their children. We were rich, and now we are poor, because the Allies were mean to us. They completely omitted the why.
They ignored the suffering their husbands caused and focused entirely on their own loss of status.
It was a very effective way to insulate the children from the truth, from any sense of inherited guilt.
But, and here's a major twist from the research, were they really all that poor? We need to talk about Nazi gold and the hidden wealth. Because not everyone ended up in a cabin without power.
No, not at all. This is a crucial distinction. We often think of the Nazis losing everything, but the industrial connections, the capital that survived. Take the Quandt family.
This links back to the Goebbels family, doesn't it?
Yes. Magda Goebbels, before she married Joseph Goebbels, was married to Gunther Quandt, a massive industrialist. She had a son from that marriage, Harold Quandt.
He's the one who wasn't in the bunker at the end.
Right. He was an officer in the Luftwaffe, was captured, and ended up a POW. He survived the war.
So he gets out after the war.
And after his release, he and his half-brother Herbert inherited an industrial empire. This included heavy stakes in Varda batteries and eventually BMW.
BMW.
Yes. The family fortune was built on wartime manufacturing, which, let's be very clear, often utilized slave labor from concentration camps. But Harold didn't lose that fortune. He became one of West Germany's wealthiest men. So while Etta Goering is suing for a single painting, the Goebbels stepson is quietly building a modern industrial dynasty.
It's such a stark contrast. You have the royalty of the party scrambling for scraps and suing the state, and the industrial scion just quietly keeping the capital.
It shows where the real power lay, perhaps.
But there's another kind of wealth that survived, and that's the network, the connections. And this brings us to Gudrun Himmler.
Gudrun Birgitz, as she became known after her marriage, Heinrich Himmler's daughter.
In the research, she comes across as almost a mafia figure, a godmother of the old guard.
That's a very fair comparison. She didn't just survive, she thrived in the neo-Nazi underground. She was a key figure in an organization called Still Hill Silent Aid.
Which sounds like a benevolent charity, but...
It was anything but. It was a support network for war criminals. They provided legal aid, money, and housing for SS officers who were on the run or facing trial.
We're talking about people like Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon.
And Erich Priebke, responsible for the Arditein Caves massacre. Gudrun was helping them. She was the Nazi princess to the neo-Nazi movement. She was their tangible link to the Reich, a sort of living relic they could adore.
She never tried to hide it.
Never. She was defiantly proud of her father. And there's a bombshell in the notes about her employment that I honestly had to read twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating.
This is one of those facts that makes you question everything about the post-war denazification process.
It really is. In the early 1960s, Gudrun Himmler worked for the BND,
The West German intelligence agency.
the spy agency. She worked as a secretary under a false name, allegedly recruited by Reinhard Gehlen.
Wait, Reinhard Gehlen, wasn't he a former Nazi general himself?
He was. He ran Hitler's intelligence operations on the Eastern Front. After the war, he turned his entire network over to the Americans and then the West Germans to spy on the Soviets. So yes, the state that was supposed to be hunting Nazis was employing Himmler's daughter, who was simultaneously helping Nazis escape justice.
It's incredible. The cynicism is just staggering. It shows how deep those roots went. It wasn't a clean break in 1945.
Never. And that's what defines this group we call the Loyalists. Gudrun and Edda, they never renounced their fathers. They built their entire identities around defending them.
Let's look at Gudrun a bit closer to understand that mindset. There's a diary entry of hers from when she was a child that really chilled me.
The visit to Dachau.
She visited Dachau concentration camp as a child with her father.
Yes. This was in 1941. She's 12 years old. She writes in her diary, "Today we went to the SS concentration camp at Dachau. We saw everything we could."
It gets worse.
It does. She continues, "We saw the gardening work. We saw the pear trees. We saw all the pictures the prisoners painted. Marvelous."
Marvelous. She's walking through a concentration camp, a place of unimaginable death and suffering, and she's admiring the pear trees.
She sees a Potemkin village. Himmler shows her the nice parts, the garden, the workshops, the art made by prisoners who were forced to create it, and she maintains that delusion for her entire life.
She refused to believe he committed suicide.
Insisted the British murdered him. She wore a silver brooch he gave her, 4 horses' heads, arranged in the shape of a swastika, until the day she died.
And she lived a long time.
She died in 2018. She was attending SS reunions well into her old age, revered in those circles. To them, she was royalty, the keeper of the flame.
And Etta Goering. She was also a loyalist, but in a different way, right? She seemed less political, more focused on the high life, the lost glamour.
Less of a political activist, more of a socialite of the fallen Reich.
Right.
In the 1970s, she had an affair with a journalist named Gerd Heidemann.
The one who later got embroiled in the Hitler Diaries hoax.
The very same. And the details of their social life are grotesque. They held parties on board her father's former yacht, the Karen II,
They partied on Goering's yacht in the 70s.
with former SS generals, Karl Wolff, Wilhelm Mohnke, high-ranking war criminals. They would drink and reminisce about the good old days.
What was her perspective on her father then?
She gave an interview where she said, "I loved him very much. I actually expect that most everybody has a favorable opinion of my father, except maybe in America."
That level of denial is pathological. It's not just loving your dad, it's ignoring the entire world's judgment for 70 years.
It is. But you have to see it as a defense mechanism. If you admit your father is the devil, what does that make you? You are his blood. You are his creation. For some, that's a truth too terrible to face.
Well, that's the perfect segue, because some of them did face it, and the psychological toll it took on them is just devastating. We call them the renunciates.
The other side of the coin. Total, violent rejection.
Let's start with Nicholas Frank, the son of Hans Frank.
A governor general of occupied Poland, known as the Butcher of Poland, responsible for the deaths of millions.
And Nicholas has made a career out of hating his father. It's his life's work.
It truly is. He wrote a book called The Father, A Settling of Accounts. It is one of the most visceral, hateful texts you will ever read. He doesn't just critique his father's politics. He attacks him as a man, as a coward, as a weakling who sold his soul for power.
There's a detail in the sources regarding a photo he keeps. It's graphic, but we have to mention it to understand the depth of this hatred.
The post-execution photo.
He carries a photo of his father's dead body after the hanging at Nuremberg.
Yes, he keeps it in his wallet. He has said in interviews that he looks at it to ensure he is dead, to make sure the monster is really gone.
That is intense.
He describes a childhood memory that haunts him, playing in a fancy pedal car near the Wawel Castle in Poland and seeing through the fence skeletons in rags.
Child prisoners.
Yes, from the nearby ghetto. He saw them through the fence. He didn't understand it then. He was a little boy in a luxury toy. But he remembers the contrast. He's the prince. They are dying of starvation. And he has spent every day since trying to atone for that image.
And then there are those who took it even further, physically further. Bettina Goering.
Herman's great-niece.
Now, for her, it wasn't just the name, it was the face.
Yes. The physical resemblance was strong. She looked like him. She had the eyes, the build.
That must be terrifying, to look in the mirror and see a monster, a war criminal looking back at you.
She found it unbearable. So she and her brother made a pact. They both decided to undergo voluntary sterilization.
To cut the line.
That's the exact phrase they used. They wanted to ensure no more Goerings would walk the earth. It's a tragic, almost biological acceptance of guilt, as if the evil is in the DNA itself, and the only way to stop it is to end the bloodline.
Where did she end up?
She moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, lives in a commune, as far away from Germany and that legacy as she could possibly get.
It's such a drastic measure. But then you have the Huss family. Rudolf Höss, the commandant of Auschwitz, we talked about proximity earlier. This family literally lived next door to the gas chambers.
Adjoining, there was a garden wall, and on the other side was the camp. The family villa had a swimming pool, a beautiful garden.
There's a gate in that garden wall.
The gate to hell, as it's been called. The children played in the garden. They had toys made by the prisoners. They had clothes sewn by prisoners.
And they could see the chimneys from their windows.
From the upstairs windows.
Yep.
They could see the smoke day and night. The parents told them they were bakeries or disinfection units burning contaminated clothes.
Bakeries. That is a level of evil deceit that is just sickening.
But the smell. You can't hide the smell of burning bodies. The children knew something was terribly wrong. But again, look at the divergence in the family and the aftermath.
Right.
You have Rainer Höss, the grandson, who is tormented by it. He tours schools, speaks at Auschwitz, works with survivor groups. He even donated a watch his grandfather stole from a prisoner back to the museum.
But then you have Brigitte, the daughter.
Yes. She moved to the U.S. Northern Virginia, of all places. She worked in a fashion boutique for decades.
And the owners of the boutique were Jewish, right?
Yes, Jewish refugees.
Yeah.
And they knew who she was. They hired her anyway and kept her secret. It's this bizarre, quiet pact of forgiveness, or maybe just pragmatism.
But here's the kicker.
Despite knowing what her father did, despite hiding in anonymity, she kept her father's wedding photo over her bed. She slept under it every night.
How do you reconcile that? How do you work for Jewish refugees by day and sleep under the photo of the commandant of Auschwitz by night?
In an interview, she said, "He's the nicest man in the world to us." That's the trap. She can't reconcile the man who read her fairy tales with the man who murdered millions.
So she chooses one.
She chooses the man who read the fairy tales. It's a split reality. She has to compartmentalize the love for the father from the actions of the Nazi.
But there's one family where there was no chance for post-war reckoning, no denial, no atonement.
Because they didn't survive.
We have to talk about the Goebbels bunker.
This is the ultimate tragedy of that fanaticism. May 1st, 1945. The Führer bunker in Berlin.
Magda Goebbels. We mentioned her earlier as the mother of Harold Quandt, the billionaire. But she had 6 other children with Joseph Goebbels.
Helga, Hildegard, Helmut, Holdine, Hedwig, and Heidrun. They were all named, starting with H in honor of Hitler, ages 4 to 12, the darlings of the Reich's propaganda machine.
And as the Russians are closing in, Magda makes a decision that is it's beyond comprehension to a modern mind. She decides to kill them.
And she had options. That's the crucial, horrific part of this story. She refused multiple offers to smuggle them out. Albert Speer offered to help.
The famous test pilot Hannah Reich offered to fly the children to safety.
Magda said no. Her reasoning was that a world without National Socialism was not a world worth living in for her children. She believed in reincarnation. Oddly enough, she thought if they died innocent, they'd be reborn in a better world.
So how did it happen?
They were in the bunker. A doctor gave them morphine injections mixed into hot chocolate to put them to sleep. And then Magda, with another doctor, went from bed to bed.
With cyanide.
And crushed cyanide capsules in their mouths.
There's a forensic detail in the report about Helga, the eldest. She was 12.
Yes. The Russian autopsy noted bruising on her face and body. The implication is that the morphine didn't work completely, or she woke up, she realized what was happening. She struggled against her mother.
That is just horrific.
It shatters the propaganda image. The Goebbels family was pitched as the ideal Aryan family, the perfect German mother. And in the end, that mother murdered her own children on the altar of her ideology. It's filicide driven by pure fanaticism.
It's heavy. It's incredibly heavy. Is there anyone in this dark history who actually got it right, who processed the guilt in what we might call a healthy or productive way?
There is one exception, a notable one, the Speer family, specifically Hilda Schramm.
Albert Speer's daughter.
Right. Now, Albert Speer was the so-called good Nazi at Nuremberg, the only one who accepted some responsibility, even though we now know he lied about how much he knew. But his daughter, Hild, took a very different path than Etta Goering.
She didn't sue for paintings.
Quite the opposite. She inherited 3 valuable paintings from her father's collection. She suspected they might have been looted from Jewish families during the war.
Okay.
She tried to find the original owners but couldn't trace them. So instead of keeping them or, selling them for a yacht party,
Right.
she sold them to start a foundation.
The Zurückgeben Foundation.
Which translates to return or give back. The foundation uses the money to provide grants to support Jewish women in the arts and sciences in Germany.
Wow.
She explicitly acknowledges the injury done by her father. She didn't destroy herself like Bettina Goering, and she didn't deny the crimes like Gudrun Himmler. She tried to use the blood money to fund the very culture her father tried to destroy.
That feels like the only productive response possible.
It's constructive. It accepts the past, but tries to repair the future. It's a form of restitution.
So bringing this all together, we have this huge spectrum. On one end, you have the delusional entitlement of Etta Goering suing for her baptism gifts into her old age. On the other, the self-imposed extinction of the Goering line by sterilization. And in the middle, you have all these other figures just trying to survive the name.
And many did just survive it. We shouldn't forget that most of these children lived normal, even prosperous lives in post-war Germany. They became lawyers, engineers, doctors, civil servants. They just faded into the background.
There's a final cynical thought in the outline about Martin Bormann Jr.
Ah, yes. Martin Bormann's son, Hitler's godson. His father was Hitler's private secretary, a truly shadowy and powerful figure who vanished at the end of the war.
And his son became a Catholic priest.
A priest, yes. For years, he was held up as a sign of redemption. The son of a monster serving God, working as a missionary in Africa. A perfect story.
But
later in life, he was accused of severe physical and sexual abuse by former students from a Catholic school where he taught in the 1950s and 60s.
Oh.
It's a grim reminder that trauma often begets trauma. It's not a simple Hollywood ending where he becomes a saint. The damage continues.
And what about Rolf Mengele, the son of the Angel of Death from Auschwitz?
He became a lawyer. He changed his name to protect his privacy, which is understandable. But he stayed in contact with his father while Joseph Mengele was hiding in South America.
He knew where he was.
He even visited him. When the police and Nazi hunters asked him for his father's location, he refused to tell them.
He protected him, a man who performed horrific experiments on children.
He cited natural loyalty. He said, "I could not betray my father, even knowing everything he did at Auschwitz."
It seems like that's the thread running through almost all of this, that conflict between natural loyalty to a parent and a moral obligation to humanity.
Exactly. And it leaves us with a final provocative thought to end on. We often look at the Third Reich and ask, how could an entire nation lose its moral compass? How could they let this happen?
We look for big political answers. We blame the economy or the Treaty of Versailles or propaganda.
So maybe the answer's smaller.
Yeah.
Maybe the key lies in the living rooms of these families. Think about it. In these houses, mass murder was just Papa's work.
It was something that happened at the office.
But the loss of a painting, the loss of social status, the loss of a summer home, that was treated as the true tragedy.
If you can normalize genocide at the dinner table, you can normalize anything.
Precisely. And for many of these children, the real crime wasn't the Holocaust. It was that the world stopped treating them like royalty.
That is a chilling place to leave it. This has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.
I want you to picture a scene. It's the early 1960s. We're in West Germany, in Pullach, which is just south of Munich. This is the headquarters of the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the BND.
So West Germany's Foreign Intelligence Agency.
Right. And the atmosphere is exactly what you would expect from the height of the Cold War. It's a world of gray suits, cigarette smoke, deep-seated paranoia, classified files. This is the absolute front line against the Soviet bloc.
It's the world of John le Carré, basically. Spies, secrets, and this constant nagging threat of infiltration.
Precisely. And inside this high-security agency, there is a secretary. And by all accounts, she is the model employee. She's diligent, she's quiet, very efficient.
The kind of person who just blends into the background.
Completely. Maybe a little severe, a little guarded, but she gets the work done. And she goes by an assumed name. Her colleagues know her as a reliable worker for the democratic state of West Germany. Yeah. But there is a secret behind that name. A secret that, when you finally peel it back, reveals perhaps one of the most jarring, almost nauseating ironies of the entire 20th century.
It really is one of those details that feels like it belongs in a spy thriller, not a history book. Because this secretary, she wasn't just some random woman trying to start over.
Yeah.
Her real name was Gudrun Berwitz. But she was born Gudrun Himmler.
The daughter of Heinrich Himmler.
The daughter of the Reichsführer SS. The architect of the Holocaust. The man who organized the industrial-scale slaughter of millions. And there she was, less than 20 years after the war, on the payroll of West German intelligence.
It stops you dead in your tracks, doesn't it?
It does.
You have the daughter of the man who built the Gestapo working for the very agency that is supposed to be protecting the new democratic Germany from its enemies. And the layers of irony here are so thick they are suffocating. The BND at that time was largely built on the Gehlen organization.
Right, and we should probably contextualize that for you. The Gehlen organization was run by Reinhard Gehlen, a former major general in the Wehrmacht.
A high-ranking officer.
Absolutely. The Americans, and later the West German government, hired him because he had extensive experience running intelligence against the Soviets on the Eastern Front. It was a deal with the devil, really.
It was, we need your expertise against the communists, so we will. We'll just overlook the swastika on your CV.
A very cynical pragmatism over morality.
Yeah.
But hiring Himmler's daughter, that feels like a step beyond simple pragmatism. That feels like a continuity of the old regime.
It does. It suggests that the whole denazification of Germany was, at least in some corridors of power, incredibly superficial. But here is where the story gets really, really dark. This is the real anti-hook for our deep dive today.
Because while she was cashing checks from the West German government, serving the state, Gudrun wasn't just a quiet secretary trying to escape her father's shadow.
Not at all. She was living a double life.
She was actively working against the very state that was paying her salary.
Explain that.
Well, she was simultaneously a leading figure in a shadowy organization called Still Hilfe.
Which translates to silent help.
Exactly. And it sounds innocuous, doesn't it? Like a charity for war orphans or something. But it was anything but. This was a network dedicated to funding neo-Nazis, providing legal aid to war criminals, and protecting the old guard of the SS who were on the run or facing trial.
So let me get this straight. The state was paying the woman who was actively undermining the state's attempt to reckon with its own past.
She was using her salary to help the monsters escape justice.
That is the revelation that really sets the table for what we are doing today. This is not going to be a standard biography. We aren't just rattling off dates and battles. This is a deep dive into what you might call intellectual gossip, but of the darkest, most somber variety.
We're investigating dark history through the lens of the family unit.
Right. And our mission here is to grapple with a question that is psychologically almost impossible to answer. How do children reconcile the image of a loving father, a man who read them bedtime stories, brought them chocolates, tucked them in at night, with the objective historical reality that he was a genocidal monster?
We're looking at the burden of blood. And it's a burden that, as we'll see, crushed some and completely radicalized others.
It's a spectrum of response, so we have a lot of ground to cover. We're going to focus primarily on two princesses of the Third Reich. We have the Nazi princess, Gudrun Himmler, who we've just introduced. And then we have the little princess, Etta Goering, the daughter of Hermann Goering.
But we can't just stop there. To really understand the psychology, we have to look at the whole spectrum. We need to look at the children who desperately tried to wash the blood off their hands, and tragically, the children who became the final victims of their own parents' fanaticism.
So let's go back to Gudrun. Let's really unpack the life of the woman who was known within the SS inner circle as Poopy.
Poopy. That was his nickname for her. It means dolly or puppet.
It's such a disarming, sweet, domestic nickname.
It is, and the sources are very clear on this. The bond between Heinrich Himmler and his daughter was incredibly strong. I think we had this tendency to view these top Nazis as monsters 24/7. We want to believe they went home and, kicked the dog and yelled at their kids. It makes it easier to process their evil.
But the reality is much more disturbing than that.
Much more. Himmler wasn't a distant authoritarian figure in the home. He was, by all accounts, a doting father. He called her almost daily when he was away on business.
Business being the orchestration of genocide.
Exactly. He sent flowers. He sent chocolates. He had her flown from Munich to Berlin just to be with him at his offices. To her, he wasn't the monster the world saw. He was just Papa. He was the source of warmth and safety in her entire universe.
And that domestic warmth creates this terrifying cognitive dissonance. There is a specific piece of evidence in the source material that I think just perfectly encapsulates this horror. It is a diary entry from Gudrun herself. She was 12 years old at the time, the year is 1941, and she writes about going on a special trip with her father.
Now, for most 12-year-olds, a special trip with Dad means, what? The zoo. A park. Maybe a museum, if you're lucky.
They went to Dachau.
The first concentration camp. The prototype, the model for all the terror that followed. And we have to look so closely at what she wrote. This is a 12-year-old girl witnessing the epicenter of human misery, and her diary entry is just chillingly mundane.
I have the text right here. She writes, "Today we went to the SS concentration camp in Dachau. We saw everything we could. We saw the gardening work. We saw the pear tree.
So pear trees.
We saw all the paintings made by the prisoners. Wonderful. And then we ate a lot. It was very nice."
It was very nice. That phrase just hangs in the air like smoke. She talks about pear trees. She talks about the vegetable garden.
It's the complete normalization of the grotesque.
It is. She sees the unshaven and poorly clothed prisoners. She actually notes that in the diary. But her focus goes to the vegetable garden because it reminds her of her childhood farm. It's a complete psychological disconnect.
She is walking through hell, but because she is holding her father's hand, she sees a garden.
She sees the artwork the prisoners were forced to make and calls it wonderful, completely missing the context of slave labor and terror under which it was created. It's like visiting a plantation and complimenting the quality of the cotton picking.
So the question is, do you think she was just too young to understand what she was seeing, or was this already a defense mechanism kicking in?
I think at 12, living in that bubble, she was certainly indoctrinated. She's been raised in this cult. But I think that moment sealed her fate psychologically. She couldn't see the horror then, because to see the horror would be to see her father as the creator of that horror.
And she refused to do that.
She refused for the rest of her life.
And she lived a very long time. She didn't die until 2018. That's decades of opportunity to see the truth. The war ended, the Nuremberg trials happened, the films of the camps, the piles of bodies were shown in cinemas across Germany. The world screamed the truth at her.
And she just put her fingers in her ears and hummed her father's favorite tune. After the war, when the full extent of the Holocaust was exposed, she didn't buckle. She didn't renounce him. She doubled down.
She became a militant.
Completely. She maintained until her dying day that her father didn't commit suicide by cyanide capsule in British custody. She insisted that he was murdered by the British.
Why that specific conspiracy theory? I mean, why insist on murder over suicide?
Because suicide implies guilt. Suicide implies escaping justice. It implies that he knew he had done something wrong and was afraid of the consequences. But if he was murdered, he becomes a martyr. He becomes a victim of victor's justice.
It reframes him as a hero who was silenced.
Exactly. Denial is a powerful drug. If she admits he killed himself, she destroys the memory of the man who called her poopy and took her to see the pear trees. So she chose the lie.
Let's go back to Still Health. We mentioned it at the top, but we need to understand what that work actually looked like on the ground. This wasn't just a social club for old comrades to, drink beer and reminisce.
No, not at all. This was an active, subversive support network. Still Hilf Silent Help. They were operating in the shadows. Their entire goal was to help SS war criminals evade justice.
What does that mean in practice? What were they doing?
They rented rooms for them. They paid for high-powered lawyers to fight their extradition requests. They helped fugitives get to South America, the classic escape route. And Gudrun was the gray eminence of this group. She was the one pulling the strings, the one the old Nazis looked up to with reverence.
Right. Let's talk about a specific case. Anton Maloth. This example from the sources really highlights her role. Maloth wasn't just a bureaucrat who stamped the wrong paper.
No. Anton Maloth was a sadistic guard at the Theresienstadt fortress prison. He was known as the Beautiful Tony because he was apparently quite handsome, but his actions were demonic. He was known for beating prisoners to death with his bare hands.
I read one account where he would spray water on inmates in the freezing winter until they turned into ice statues.
He was a truly vile individual, one of the worst. After the war, he escaped justice for decades.
And Gudrun Berwitz, through Still Hilf, found him a place to live.
She didn't just find him a place, she pampered him. When he was an old man, finally tracked down and living in Germany, Stillhilf arranged for him to live in a high-end nursing home. And this is where the geography gets almost incestuous, like a bad novel.
Where was it?
The nursing home was built on land that was formerly owned by Rudolf Hess.
You can't make this stuff up. It's a closed loop of Nazi history.
Exactly. She is using Nazi land to house a Nazi war criminal funded by a Nazi support network. She was caring for these men as if they were aging, beloved uncles, completely ignoring the thousands of people they tortured and murdered. To her, Mayloff wasn't a sadist. He was a comrade who was being unfairly persecuted by the victors.
And because of this unwavering loyalty, she became an icon in those circles. The sources describe her appearances at these neo-Nazi reunions, like the ones at Ulrichsburg in Austria.
She was the Nazi princess. That was her title. She was a living relic, the daughter of their saint. When she walked into a room at these gatherings, the room would go silent. You had young skinheads, modern neo-Nazis, and old, frail, former SS officers, all treating her like absolute royalty.
And she played the part. She didn't shy away from the symbolism of her heritage.
Not in the slightest. She would wear this very specific silver brooch that her father had given her. It depicted 4 horses' heads arranged in a shape that, when you look at it, forms a swastika.
So she wore a swastika brooch to neo-Nazi rallies.
Proudly. It wasn't just that she denied the crimes. She actively continued the ideological lineage. She was the bridge between the original perpetrators and the modern neo-Nazi movement. She validated them. Her presence told them, you are right to keep believing.
It is genuinely terrifying to think that this woman was walking around Munich, living a quiet suburban life while secretly carrying that torch. But she wasn't the only princess. We need to shift gears now to the other major figure in this dark fairy tale, Etta Goering.
Yes, the daughter of the Reichsmarshal, Hermann Goering.
And Etta's story it's different in tone, isn't it? If Gudrun was the militant political soldier, the true believer, Etta was the spoiled aristocrat.
Completely. Her life at Karen Hall Goering's massive country estate was just absurdly lavish. We're talking about a level of entitlement that is hard to wrap your head around, even for actual royalty.
The details are wild. Her christening in 1938 wasn't just a family event. It was basically a national holiday.
It was a full-blown state affair. Adolf Hitler was her godfather. The sources say Luftwaffe planes flew over Berlin in her honor. And the gifts. This is crucial to understanding her later life. She received artwork that belonged in museums. The city of Cologne gave her a priceless painting. She was growing up in a world where she was the absolute center of the universe.
And the Etta Schlossen, a miniature palace built just for her.
Yes, the Etta Little Palace. And let's be clear, this wasn't a plastic playhouse from a toy store. This was a miniature brick-and-mortar replica of the Sanssouci Palace, built for her in the orchard of Carenhall. It was 50 meters long. It had its own theater with a stage and curtains.
A theater? For a child.
She was playing in a literal palace while the rest of Europe was being set on fire.
And the environment inside the main house, Carenhall was essentially a private museum.
A museum of stolen art. Let's be very, very clear about this. Hermann Goering was the greatest art thief in history. Carenhall was stuffed to the gills with masterpieces looted from Jewish families, from museums in occupied France and the Netherlands. Etta grew up thinking this was normal.
She thought it was normal to have Rembrandts and Kranachs on the wall.
She didn't see loot. She just saw Daddy's things.
She was completely insulated from the reality of where all this luxury came from.
And she was the little princess. The magazine Life even called her a sort of Nazi crown princess. But then, just like with Gudrun, the bubble bursts. 1945 comes, the Russians are advancing on Berlin, the luxury ends. And the fall from grace is hard and fast. She goes from Carenhall to Camp Ashken, which was the code name for the detention center at the Palace Hotel in Luxembourg, where the top Nazis were held. And then eventually, she and her mother end up in a cabin with no electricity, struggling to find food.
That fall is so crucial to understanding her resentment. I get the sense that Gudrun's resentment was ideological. She felt her father was a political martyr. But Etta's resentment feels materialistic.
That is spot on. She felt robbed. She didn't seem to mourn the Third Reich as a political project so much as she mourned her lifestyle and her father's status. She missed the luxury. She missed the deference. She missed being the princess.
And we see that in the famous interview she gave to Swedish television in 1986. She's sitting there, older woman now, and the interviewer presses her quite directly on her father's crimes, and she just refuses to criticize Hermann Goering.
Not only refuses, she defends him. She says, my father was not a fanatic. You could see the peacefulness in his eyes. I loved him very much.
peacefulness in his eyes. This is the man who founded the Gestapo, the man who authorized the terror bombing of civilians in Warsaw and Coventry, the man who signed the order authorizing Reinhard Heydrich to organize the final solution.
But again, she is looking at the man who held her in his arms, not the man who held the pen that signed death warrants. However, what really sets Edda apart from Gudrun are the legal battles. This is where the greed versus guilt dynamic really plays out. She spent decades trying to get her stuff back.
The story of the Connacht Madonna just blows my mind. We have to break this down for you. So for her christening, the city of Cologne gives her this priceless painting, Madonna and Child by Lucas Cranach the Elder.
Correct. A masterpiece of German Renaissance art, worth a fortune.
After the war, the new democratic city government of Cologne says, hey, wait a minute. We were forced to give that under duress. The mayor who gave it was a Nazi appointee. We want it back.
A perfectly reasonable request.
And Edda fights them. She doesn't just object, she takes them to court. She fights them for 15 years.
15 years. Her argument was that it was a legitimate personal gift. She completely ignores the context, that the gift was essentially tribute paid to a warlord by a terrified city government to curry favor and avoid trouble.
The sheer audacity to stand in a courtroom in post-war Germany and say, I want my looted christening gift back, please.
It shows a complete and utter lack of shame, a moral black hole. She eventually lost the case in 1968, but she didn't stop there. This is the part that I found most shocking in the research. In 2015.
2015, we're talking the era of smartphones, modern Germany.
Yes. When she was 76 years old, she petitioned the Bavarian parliament for financial compensation.
What was she asking for?
She wanted compensation for her father's expropriated legacy. Basically, she wanted the state to give her the pension and the value of the estate that was confiscated after the Nuremberg trials.
In 2015, 70 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, the daughter of Hermann Goering is asking the German taxpayer to reimburse her for the loss of her father's blood-soaked fortune.
And thankfully, it was unanimously rejected in minutes. But just pause and think about the psychology of that petition. It speaks to a sense of victimhood that is completely impervious to historical reality. She lived in a bubble of denial until the very end. She didn't see the millions of dead. She saw her lost inheritance. She believed she was the one who had been wronged.
So we have Gudrun, the militant true believer, and Edda, the entitled, greedy aristocrat. Both loyalists in their own way. But they weren't the only ones. The source material outlines a whole spectrum of how these children responded to their lineage. It wasn't always just blind loyalty.
No, sometimes it was a different kind of delusion, and sometimes it was a desperate, almost biological need to end the bloodline.
Right. If we look at the delusion, we have to talk about Wolfgang Hess.
The son of Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy, who famously flew to Scotland in 1941.
The man who parachuted into a Scottish field, claiming he wanted to negotiate peace.
Exactly. And his son, Wolf, spent his entire adult life fighting for his father's reputation. He founded the Committee to Free Rudolf Hess. He bought into this myth that his father was a messenger of peace, conveniently ignoring that the peace Hess wanted was one where Nazi Germany dominated Europe and Britain just got out of the way.
And when Rudolf Hess died in Spandau prison in 1987, which was ruled a suicide by hanging at the age of 93, Wolf refused to believe it.
He claimed the British Secret Service murdered him to prevent him from revealing secrets that would embarrass the UK. He spent his life as the caretaker of a ghost of a myth. There is a quote from Wolf that is just so tragic. He said, "I never had time for myself. I spent all my free time on my father."
He sacrificed his own identity.
Completely. He became the keeper of his father's myth. He was a prisoner of Spandau just as much as his father was, just in a different way.
But then, let's go to the absolute other extreme on this spectrum, the radical renunciation. We have to look at the people who looked at their bloodline and saw not a legacy to protect, but a virus to be contained. And we look at the Goering family again, specifically Bettina Goering.
The great niece of Hermann.
Yes, and her story is... it's a shocking decision. Bettina and her brother actually underwent voluntary sterilization.
That is heavy.
It is. They essentially decided to cut the line. They felt the genetic burden was so heavy, the potential for evil so inherent in their blood, that they refused to pass it on. Bettina said she didn't want to create another monster.
She moved to a commune in the United States, living in Santa Fe, as far away from German history as she could physically and culturally get. It's an act of biological atonement. They punished their own unborn children for the crimes of their ancestors.
Biological termination of the family line. But is there a middle ground? Is there anyone who didn't deny the crimes, but also didn't feel the need to, destroy themselves?
Yes. And that brings us to maybe the most hopeful, if you can call it that, story in this whole saga. And that is Hilde Ram. She was the daughter of Albert Speer.
Albert Speer, the Nazi who said sorry, Hitler's chief architect, and later the Minister of Armaments.
Right. Speer is a very complicated figure. He admitted some responsibility at Nuremberg, which saved him from the news, though historians now know he was deeply involved in the Holocaust and the use of slave labor.
Far more than he admitted.
Far more. But his daughter Hilde took that public admission of guilt and went much, much further. She became what we might call a constructive atoner.
She did something really fascinating with the art she inherited, and this contrasts so perfectly with Etta Goering's story.
It really does. It's the polar opposite. She inherited 3 valuable paintings from her father. Now, she didn't have hard proof that they were looted, but she knew her father's position. She suspected they might have been taken from Jewish families. She tried to find the original owners, but couldn't.
Now, Etta Goering would have kept them on the wall, or sold them and kept the cash and petitioned for more.
Precisely. Hilde Schramm sold them. But she didn't keep a single cent of the money. She used the proceeds to found the Zurich-Geben Foundation.
Which translates to return or give back.
Yes, and the foundation uses that money to fund projects for Jewish women in the arts and sciences in Germany. She used the potential spoils of her father's crimes to actively support the very community he helped to destroy.
That is such a powerful and deliberate action. It shows that biology isn't destiny. You have a choice. You can be Etta, fighting the city of Cologne for your looted Madonna, or you can be Hilde, selling the art to try and repair the world, even in a small way.
Absolutely. Hilde confronted what she called the black hole of her family history. She didn't hide from it, but she also didn't let it define her as a victim or a perpetrator. She took responsibility for the legacy, even if not for the crimes themselves.
Now, we have to go to the darkest part of this story. We have talked about the children who survived, the ones who grew up to make these choices, to deny, to fight, or to atone. But there were children who never got the chance to choose. We have to talk about the Goebbels children.
This is the ultimate tragedy of this whole topic. The 6 children of Joseph and Magda Goebbels. Helga, Hilde, Helmut, Hold, Hedda, and Hyde. They ranged in age from 4 to 12.
And they were used as propaganda props their entire short lives.
They were the poster children for the Aryan ideal. They were constantly in the newsreels, appearing in films. The sources mentioned a particularly cruel irony. They were used in propaganda films to contrast healthy Aryan children against disabled children in the context of the T4 euthanasia propaganda.
For those who might not know, T4 was the Nazi program where they systematically murdered disabled and mentally ill people.
Correct. So these children were, in effect, used to justify the murder of other children before they were murdered themselves. And there's that persistent myth that their names all started with H to honor Hitler.
I've heard that for years. Is it true?
The sources clarified that this was actually a tradition from Magda's first marriage to the industrialist Gunther Quandt, who also chose H names for his children. But regardless of the intent, in the public eye, they were the Hitler children. They spent their final days in the Führer bunker, playing with Hitler's dog, Blondie, while the Russian artillery pounded the city of Berlin to rubble above them.
The atmosphere in that bunker, it's suffocating just to read about it. And Magda Goebbels, the mother, her fanaticism is just terrifying. She famously wrote a letter where she said, "A world without National Socialism is not a world in which my children should live."
She viewed her children not as independent human beings with their own futures, but as extensions of the ideology. If the ideology dies, the children must die with it. It's a complete negation of maternal instinct in favor of political fanaticism and the method. It was so cold, so calculated.
May 1st, 1945. What do we know about how it happened?
The sources say they arranged for a dentist, a man named Helmut Kunz, to inject the children with morphine. That put them to sleep. And then, once they were unconscious, crushed cyanide capsules were placed in their mouths. It was likely administered by Magda herself, or perhaps Hitler's doctor, Ludwig Stumpfeger. The accounts vary slightly.
Just think about that for a moment. The mother tucking them into bed for the very last time. But there is a forensic detail in the autopsy reports that has always haunted me.
You're thinking of Helga.
Yes, the eldest. She was 12 years old.
The Russian autopsy showed bruising on her face.
Which suggests?
It suggests she woke up, or that she resisted. The morphine didn't knock her out completely. Imagine that final moment. The 12-year-old girl, groggy, realizing something is terribly wrong, realizing her own mother is forcing something into her mouth. She fought back. It just breaks the heart. It's the ultimate betrayal of what we call the fourth wall of the family. The mother, the ultimate protector, becomes the executioner.
And yet, there was a survivor from that family unit. Not one of the 6 in the bunker, but Magda's son from her first marriage, Harold Quandt.
Harold is the ghost in the machine of modern Germany. He was a Luftwaffe officer, a prisoner of war in a camp in Benghazi in North Africa when the Suicide Pact happened.
So he was completely removed from it.
Yes. Magda wrote him a final letter from the bunker. She told him, be loyal. Loyal to yourself, loyal to the people, and loyal to your country. A final piece of indoctrination.
And he came back to a devastated Germany. But unlike the Goebbels children, he had an exit strategy. He had the Quandt industrial fortune waiting for him.
A fortune built, we should always note, on forced labor during the Nazi era. The Quandt factories used slave labor from concentration camps to produce batteries and munitions. Harold inherited this empire. He and his half-brother Herbert rebuilt it. Today, the Quandt family owns a massive stake in BMW.
It's a silent success story that rose directly from a family graveyard.
He inherited the money, but he also inherited the silence. The Quandt family, for a very long time, was notoriously quiet about their wartime history.
Yeah.
While his half-siblings lay dead in the bunker, victims of their mother's fanaticism, Harold built an industrial empire on the legacy that fanaticism helped create. It just shows how uneven the burden of blood can be. Some die, some get rich, some get sterilized.
So, after all of this, what does it all mean? We've looked at the loyalists like Gudrun and Edda. We've looked at the critics like Hilde Schramm. We've looked at the tragic victims like the Goebbels children. When we step back, what is the core psychology here? Why do some cling so desperately to the lie while others are able to face the truth?
I think it comes down to that concept of the fourth wall of the family I mentioned earlier. For a child, your father's the man who comes home, he picks you up, he smells like tobacco and cologne, and he makes you feel safe. That is your primary reality.
Right. That's the visceral truth, the lived experience.
The public reality, that he is a mass murderer, a war criminal, is an abstraction. It's something the world tells you, but it directly contradicts your primary emotional experience.
So to accept the world's truth, you have to effectively kill your own memory. You have to admit your childhood was a lie.
Exactly. You have to admit that the love you felt was a lie, or at least that it came from a source of pure evil, and that is simply too psychologically painful for many people. Gudrun and Edda chose to protect the memory of the loving father because it was the only way to protect their own childhoods. If Himmler's a monster, then Gudrun is the daughter of a monster, and her happy memories of visiting Dachau are grotesque.
But if Himmler is a hero, then she is a princess, and the whole world is just lying.
It's a powerful defense mechanism. It's self-preservation.
But Hilde Schramm shows that you can break that mechanism. You can separate the father from the deeds, or acknowledge that a person can be loving to their child and simultaneously evil to the world, and that you have a responsibility to the world to try and fix what he broke.
It requires immense moral courage. It requires facing that concept of genetic guilt. You have to accept that your privilege, your art, your very existence might be built on the suffering of others. And then you have to actively try to make it right.
It's an incredibly heavy burden, and I want to leave you, our listeners, with this final provocative thought. It's very easy for us, sitting here decades later, to judge Gudrun or Edda. We see the history books, we've seen the films from the camps, we see the piles of bodies. It's black and white to us.
But it wasn't black and white to them, it was the color of their father's uniform.
Exactly. So ask yourself this. If you were raised in a golden cage, told your father was the greatest hero of the nation, and he treated you with nothing but absolute love, and then the world turned around and told you he was the devil incarnate, would you have the strength to denounce him? Or would you, like Gudrun and Edda, cling to the only love you ever knew?
That really is the question. Is love blind, or is it just willfully ignorant?
Until the next deep dive, keep asking those hard questions.
Yeah.
I want you to just close your eyes for a second and imagine a childhood, but not a normal one. I'm talking about a fairy tale.
Right.
You live on a massive country estate, maybe it's a castle. You have servants who cater to your every whim. Your father he's the most powerful man you know. Maybe the most powerful man in the country.
A hero.
A hero in your eyes, absolutely. He brings you chocolates from his travels. He calls you his little princess. He tucks you in at night with what feels like genuine affection. And then practically overnight, the world just flips upside down.
Everything you knew is gone.
You're dragged out of the castle, you're thrown into poverty, and you're told that this man, this hero who gave you your entire identity is actually one of the worst monsters in human history.
I mean, that's a psychological break that is almost impossible for us to wrap our heads around. We're not just talking about finding out your dad was, a tax cheat or a liar.
No, not even close.
We are talking about the architects of the Third Reich, the men who were responsible for the Holocaust.
Exactly, and that is what we are unpacking today. We are looking at the children of the Nazi elite, the children of the Third Reich. It's a deep dive into blood, shadow, and this really, really uncomfortable question. Is loyalty biological? What happens when the person you love most in the world is the person the rest of the world hates most?
It is a heavy topic, but it's such a necessary one. We're drawing from a whole stack of sources today, primarily Tania Krasniansky's book, Children of Nazis, but also interviews, memoirs like My Father's Keeper, and just extensive research on the psychology of these descendants.
And we're going to look at how they handled this legacy of genocide.
And the range of reactions is, it's just staggering.
It's wild, honestly. You have some who became these neo-Nazi icons, literally worshipped by the far right until the day they died.
And on the complete other end of the spectrum,
you have others who literally sterilized themselves so they wouldn't pass on what they called their cursed blood.
It really runs the gamut from absolute fanaticism to complete self-destruction. And, in the middle, you have people just trying to survive the name.
So let's set the scene a bit. We're talking about the 1930s and the early 40s. While Europe is burning, these kids are living in what you can only describe as a gilded cage.
Gilded cage is the perfect phrase for it.
Right.
You have to understand the level of privilege here. These weren't just wealthy children. They were treated like actual royalty.
So take Etta Goering, for example.
Daughter of Hermann Goering.
Right, the Reich Marshal, head of the Luftwaffe.
Her birth in 1938 was treated like a national holiday. There were flyovers by the German Air Force. She received hundreds of thousands of telegrams.
Wow.
And she grew up at Cairnhall, which wasn't just a house. It was this hunting lodge that Goering turned into his own private palace.
I read about Cairnhall. It sounds completely insane. A private theater, a gymnasium, a miniature railway in the garden.
And lions.
Nice.
We can't forget the lions.
Lions,
Yeah.
Seriously.
Hermann Goering raised lion cubs as pets. There were these surreal photos of little Etta, this toddler in a white dress, just playing in the grass next to these wild predators.
What does that even signify?
It paints this picture of absolute power over people, power over nature. And then there was the art.
Oh, the stolen art.
Walls covered in it.
Yeah.
Masterpieces pilfered from Jewish collections and museums all across Europe.
There's one specific painting that always comes up, right?
The Madonna and Child by Lucas Cranach the Elder. It was a baptism gift to her.
A gift from the city of Cologne?
Exactly. But it had been taken from a museum collection under, well, let's just say under pressure. So from day one, Etta is literally surrounded by the spoils of her father's crimes.
But to her, it's just home. It's just nice things from Papa. She has no context for the suffering that paid for all that luxury.
None at all. And she wasn't the only one living like this. We have to talk about Gudrun Himmler.
Heinrich Himmler's daughter.
She was known as Poopy.
Poopy, which means poppet or little doll. It is so chilling to think of the architect of the SS, the man running the concentration camps, calling his daughter Poopy.
But by all accounts, he was a doting father.
Fair.
And that is the tension we have to sit with throughout this entire deep dive.
He was affectionate.
He called her every single day. He sent her flowers and chocolates. He'd fly her out on private planes just to see him. So to Gudrun, he wasn't this monster. He was the absolute center of her universe.
There's this one story that really stuck with me from the research. It's from Gudrun's own diary. She's 12 years old, and she goes on a business trip with her dad.
To Dachau.
To Dachau, 1941. She visits the first concentration camp.
And you'd think even at 12, you'd sense the horror. You would sense the misery in the air.
But her diary entry it's just baffling. She writes about the gardening work. She sees paintings done by the prisoners and says they are wonderful.
And she ends the entry with that one line.
It was very nice.
It was very nice. That phrase just haunts me. That is the power of the bubble they were living in. She didn't see suffering. She saw what her father wanted her to see.
A sanitized, orderly world where these prisoners were just laboring for Germany. It's a complete and total distortion of reality.
And they were props, too. The regime used them constantly.
Absolutely. They were the poster children for the ideal Aryan family. You look at the Goebbels children.
Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, he had 6 children with his wife Magda.
All their names started with H, right? Helga, Hildegard, Helmut, supposedly to honor Hitler.
That's the common belief, yes.
Yeah.
And they were filmed constantly, playing in gardens, singing, looking healthy and happy.
And this was all calculated.
Completely. The regime was simultaneously euthanizing disabled children in secret programs and at the same time showing the Goebbels children as the correct version of German youth. It was pure marketing.
And they were close to Hitler, too. He wasn't the Führer to them. He was Uncle Hitler.
Exactly. Etta Goering had Hitler as a godfather. Gudrun Himmler got dolls from him. He was this benevolent figure in their lives, a kindly uncle who gave them gifts.
So when the war ends, they're not just losing a political leader.
They're losing a beloved family member.
Which brings us to the crash. 1945. The dream ends, and it ends violently.
It is so abrupt. The luxury just vanishes overnight. Etta Goering goes from a palace with lions to a small cabin with no electricity. Her mother, Emmy, is arrested.
And Gudrun Himmler.
She and her mother are arrested by the Americans, bounced around internment camps in Italy and France. They go from being the absolute elite to being prisoners, often held alongside the very people their fathers had persecuted.
But the Goebbels children, their story is the darkest of them all. We have to address that.
It's the ultimate betrayal. As the Soviets are closing in on Berlin, Magda and Joseph Goebbels move the whole family into the Führer bunker.
And Magda makes a decision.
She decides that a world without National Socialism is not a world worth living in, especially not for her children.
So she murders them.
She murders them. All 6 children. The oldest was only 12.
How? How did she do it?
They were given morphine to make them sleep, and then she and a doctor crushed cyanide capsules in their mouths. It just shows the level of fanaticism. For Magda Goebbels, her children were just extensions of the ideology. If the ideology dies, the children must die too.
That's horrific. But for the children who survived, Gudrun, Etta, Nicholas Frank, Rolf Mengele, they had to live with the aftermath.
They had to walk out into a Germany that was broken, where their family names were suddenly poisoned.
The stigma must have been immediate.
Oh, absolutely. Some were refused entry to schools. People would spit on them in the street. But the real trauma, the deeper one, was what they called the crumbling of the idol.
That's when they started seeing the photos.
Yes. The photos of the camps in the newspapers.
Yeah.
They saw the mounds of bodies, the emaciated survivors, and they had to somehow reconcile that with the poopy and the princess childhoods.
And this is where it gets so fascinating, because they all react so differently. You'd think seeing the reality of the Holocaust would make everyone say, okay, my dad was evil.
But that's not what happened at all.
Not even close.
Let's start with the loyalists, the ones who chose denial.
Gudrun Berwitz, née Himmler, she is the queen of denial.
She is often called the Nazi princess within far-right circles. Until the day she died in 2018, she never once renounced National Socialism.
And she refused to believe her father committed suicide.
She was adamant. She insisted the British murdered him.
She was also involved in that organization, Still Hilf, Silent Help.
Yes. It sounds charitable, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But its entire purpose was to help former SS members escape prosecution.
So she was helping the criminals.
They provided money, legal defense, housing. She dedicated her whole life to helping the very men who carried out her father's orders. She was a regular at far-right reunions, like the ones in Ulrichsburg, Austria.
And people there revered her.
People would line up just to meet her because she was the blood of the Reichsfuhrer SS, a living link to the Reich.
But here's the nugget that just blew my mind. This is real intellectual gossip territory. She worked for the West German Intelligence Agency, the BND.
Yes. In the early 1960s, she worked there as a secretary under an assumed name. It's one of those historical ironies that just makes you shake your head.
The daughter of Himmler, working for the Democratic West German Intelligence Service, while secretly supporting SS fugitives on the side.
Talk about living a double life.
And she wasn't the only one obsessed with her father's reputation. There's Wolf Rudiger Hess.
The son of Rudolf Hess. His entire life was a crusade. You have to remember, Rudolf Hess flew to Scotland in 1941 and was imprisoned for the rest of his life. For decades, he was the sole prisoner in Spandau prison.
And Wolf spent his whole life trying to get him out.
He founded the committee to free Rudolf Hess. But more than that, he was a massive conspiracy theorist. When his father died in prison at age 93, the official ruling was suicide.
Wolf never bought it.
Not for a second. He claimed the British Secret Intelligence Service murdered his father to keep him from revealing embarrassing secrets about the war.
He even commissioned a second autopsy, didn't he?
He did. He was absolutely convinced his father was a martyr, a man of peace, and the ideological continuity is just chilling. He named his own son Wolf Andreas, who was born on Hitler's birthday.
Oof. That is a choice. A very deliberate one.
It's a clear signal.
Then you have Etta Goering. She wasn't political in the same way, was she? She wasn't out there leading rallies?
No, she was less about the ideology and more about the entitlement. She just refused to believe her father was a fanatic. She famously said, "I loved him very much." You can see the peacefulness in his eyes.
Peacefulness. In the eyes of Hermann Goering.
To her, yes. But her public battle was about the stuff, the loot. In the 1960s, she actually sued the German government to get the art back.
The stolen art. That painting.
Yes, that Madonna and Child painting we mentioned earlier. She argued it was her personal inheritance. She felt she was entitled to it.
It shows this breathtaking detachment from reality, that this art was stolen from the victims of her father's regime. Just didn't seem to register.
She just wanted her baptism gift back. It's that gilded cage again. Mentally, she never really left it.
Exactly. But then we have the ambivalent ones, the ones who knew it was wrong, but they just couldn't quite cut the cord.
And this is where it gets morally gray.
Rolf Mengele, the son of Josef Mengele, the angel of death at Auschwitz.
I mean, that is heavy, heavy burden. Being a Goering is one thing. Being a Mengele is another. The crimes are so visceral, so personal, so medical.
And Rolf grew up horrified by what he heard. He says his politics were diametrically opposed to his father's.
But he didn't turn him in.
No. And this is the real moral dilemma. Josef Mengele was hiding in South America for years. And in 1977, Rolf actually went to Brazil to meet him.
A secret meeting in the jungle, essentially.
What did he want?
Rolf wanted answers. He wanted to see some remorse. He confronted his father. He asked him about the experiments, about the selections at the ramp in Auschwitz.
And what did Josef Mengele say?
He felt no guilt. None. He told his son he saved lives by selecting people for work. He saw himself as a soldier just doing his duty.
That must have been absolutely crushing for Rolf.
It was. Rolf realized his father was completely unrepentant. But when he came back to Germany, he didn't call the authorities. He said later, "I would never betray my father. No one in the world can ask me to do that."
So he chose blood over justice.
It highlights that impossible tension between your moral duty to humanity and your biological loyalty to a parent. He waited until his father was dead to speak out publicly.
He did change his name, though, didn't he?
Yes, he took his wife's surname. He wanted to spare his own children the burden of being Mengelus. So he rejected the name, but he protected the man.
There's another one in this category. Martin Bormann Jr., son of Hitler's powerful private secretary. He became a priest.
A Catholic priest and a missionary in Africa, yes. He is fascinating because he really intellectualized the conflict. He went and visited survivors, he visited the sites of the crimes, but he found a kind of theological loophole to cope.
The Fifth Commandment.
Honor thy father and mother. Bormann Jr.'s argument was that this commandment applies to the parent-child relationship, regardless of what that parent does out in society.
So he could honor the man who raised him,
while condemning the Nazi leader who helped destroy Europe. He compartmentalized the man from the monster.
It sounds like a survival mechanism. It's a way to keep your sanity.
Absolutely. Because the alternative is what we see in Nicholas Frank.
Okay, we need to slow down here. Nicholas Frank, he is so central to this deep dive because he just breaks the mold completely. He is the hater.
Nicholas is the son of Hans Frank, the Governor General of occupied Poland. He was known as the Butcher of Poland. He oversaw the ghettoization and extermination of millions.
And Nicholas doesn't just dislike his father, he loathes him. It's so personal.
It's a visceral, burning hatred. And to understand it, you have to look at his childhood. Because unlike Gudrun or Etta, Nicholas did not have a doting father.
No.
Hans Frank and his wife Brigitte were cold, they were distant. They actually nicknamed Nicholas Fremde.
Which means stranger.
Yes. They called their own kid Stranger.
That explains a lot right there.
It really sets the stage. There's one specific incident Nicholas talks about that seems to encapsulate his entire trauma. He was about 4 years old. His mother took him to the Krakow ghetto.
The ghettos! Why on earth would you take a 4-year-old child to the Krakow ghetto?
To buy corsets. She told him, the Jews make the best corsets. So they drive into this place of absolute misery in their big black Mercedes. And Nicholas describes sitting in the back, acting like a little prince, waving at people. And he looks out the window, and he sees children his own age.
And they don't look like him at all.
No. He describes them so vividly, bones protruding from their skin, their eyes were hollow, just staring at him. He saw the skeletal faces of starvation.
And his mother is just shopping.
His mother is shopping. And that contrast, the luxury of the oppressor versus the starvation of the victim, it seared itself into his brain. He realized later that his comfort, his little car, came directly from their suffering.
And he has spent his entire life making sure nobody forgets that. He wrote these books that just savage his parents.
In The Shadow of the Reich, sometimes it's translated as The Father, or Reckoning. It is the complete assassination of his father's character. He calls him a coward, a greedy social climber who would have killed anyone for Hitler.
He rejects any attempt to humanize him.
Completely. He strips away any dignity his father might have had left.
But the most shocking detail, the one that really shows the depth of this hatred, is the photo.
Yes. Nicholas carries a photo in his wallet. But it's not a family portrait. It's a photo of his father's corpse.
After he was hanged at Nuremberg.
It's the post-execution photo. And he keeps it on him at all times.
Why? That is so macabre.
When people ask him, he says, "I'm pleased by what the picture shows. He is dead." It's his grounding mechanism. He needs to see it, to know that the monster is truly dead. It's his visual proof that the man who called him stranger and murdered millions is gone forever.
And it gets even darker. I read in Tanya Krasniansky's book about a sort of ritual he has.
It is disturbing, but it's important because it shows the extent of the psychological scarring. He has written that on the anniversary of his father's execution, he has these fantasies of dissecting his father.
Dissecting him.
Yes. It's violent. It's a very dark fantasy.
Yeah.
But for him, it's his way of reclaiming power over the man who created him. He is trying to kill the father inside himself over and over and over again.
My God. It's tragic, really. He's trapped in this cycle of hatred just as much as Gudrun was trapped in her cycle of love.
That's a perfect way to put it. He's trying to purge his own DNA.
Which is exactly what some of the others have tried to do, quite literally.
Right. This brings us to the constructive path, or maybe you'd call it genetic rejection. We have Bettina Goering.
The great niece of Hermann Goering.
She and her brother took the most extreme step. They both decided to get sterilized.
Voluntarily sterilized.
Because they were terrified of passing on the blood of a monster. They chose to cut the line. It is the ultimate rejection of the Nazi obsession with bloodlines and genetics. They basically said the Goering line ends with us.
That's heartbreaking, but also, I kind of get the logic. If you're raised in a culture that screams blood is everything, then you might start to believe your own blood is evil.
Precisely. They internalized the Nazi logic, but they flipped it on its head. So instead of Aryan supremacy, it's Aryan toxicity.
But not everyone went that dark. There's Hilde Schramm, Albert Speer's daughter.
Hilde's the prime example of active atonement. Her father, Albert Speer, was Hitler's architect and armaments minister.
He was the so-called good Nazi at Nuremberg who apologized.
Although we now know he lied about how much he actually knew. But Hilde didn't hide from the legacy. She became a politician for the Green Party.
And she started a foundation, right?
The Zurich-Gavin Foundation, which translates to return or give back. She inherited some art from her father, likely looted or bought with dirty money, and she sold it.
And what does she do with the money?
She used the proceeds to fund projects for Jewish women, specifically artists and scientists.
So instead of suing to keep the art like Etta Goering?
She sold it to help the descendants of her father's victims. Exactly. She acknowledges the crimes. She's hosted refugees. She uses her name and her privilege to try and repair the world her father helped to break.
It's a constructive way of dealing with that enormous guilt.
It really is.
Yeah.
And then there's the plot twist to end all plot twists. Jennifer Teege.
This story is just incredible.
Jennifer is a black German woman. She was adopted as a child. One day she's just browsing in a library, and she pulls a book off the shelf about Amon Goeth.
The brutal commandant from Schindler's List, the guy who shot prisoners from his balcony for sport.
That's the one. And she starts reading, and she realizes that's her grandfather. Her biological mother was Monica Hertwig, Goeth's daughter, who had a brief relationship with a Nigerian student.
So you have a black woman who is the direct descendant of a notorious Nazi commandant who would have wanted her dead on sight.
It just shatters the entire concept of Nazi blood. She's the living, breathing proof that identity is so much more complex than genetics. She had to reconcile loving her grandmother, who she knew was a kind, loving woman, with the fact that that same grandmother lived in that villa at the Plazo camp, ignoring the shootings outside her window.
It's unbelievable. So we have this whole spectrum. The hater, Nicholas, the lover, Gudrun, the ambivalent one, Rolf, and the atoner, Hilde.
Which brings us back to the big question, the real core of this deep dive. Why? Why does Nicholas hate Walt Gudrun loves? They saw the same newsreels. They lived through the same history.
What's the difference?
This is where we get to the core theory. Tanya Krasniansky, in her book, calls it the theory of intimacy.
Unpack that for us. What does that mean?
It basically says that a child's political reaction to their father's crimes is determined by their emotional relationship with that father.
So if your dad was nice to you, you defend him no matter what.
In essence, yes. Look at the pattern. Gudrun Himmler, Etta Goering, Wolf Hess. All three of them had fathers who were, by their accounts, doting.
Affectionate.
Fathers who came home and played on the floor with them, who sent gifts, who showed genuine affection. For these children, to condemn the Nazi is to kill the loving father in their memory. They can't separate the two.
So the emotional bond is too strong. It overrides the historical facts.
They can't admit he was a monster because he wasn't a monster to them.
Right. But then you look at Nicholas Frank.
Or Martin Bormann Jr. Their fathers were cold, distant, authoritarian, in some cases emotionally abusive. There was no deep emotional bond there to break.
So it was easier for them to see the truth. There was no loving memory getting in the way.
As Krasniansky puts it, the more you have distance, the easier it is to judge. Nicholas didn't have to kill a loving father in his mind. He was already dealing with a man who called him stranger. So he could look at the crimes objectively. He could see the piles of bodies and say, yes, the man who ignored me is capable of that.
That makes so much sense. But it's also terrifying, because it implies that if Hans Frank had just been a nicer dad, Nicholas might be a neo-Nazi today.
It's a distinct and very disturbing possibility. It suggests that our moral compass might be far more dependent on our childhood affection than any of us want to admit.
Which leads us to the big, ambiguous ending. The question we posed right at the start, is evil genetic?
The Nazis certainly thought so. They believed in good blood and bad blood. And what's so strange is that some of the children, like Bettina Goering, seem to have believed it too by sterilizing themselves.
But then you have Hilda Schramm doing all this good work. You have Nicholas, for all his trauma, fighting against fascism. They share the same blood as the Loyalists.
Which strongly suggests that evil is not a gene. It's a choice. But it's a choice that is heavily, heavily influenced by trauma, by your upbringing, and by the stories we tell ourselves about our families. These children weren't doomed from birth, but they were certainly burdened from birth.
It leaves you with this really uncomfortable thought about compartmentalization.
It does. We like to think of monsters as being monsters 24/7. We like to think they kick dogs and scream at their kids.
But the reality is, a man can sign a death warrant for 1,000 Jewish children at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
And come home at 5:30, pick up his daughter, give her a piece of chocolate, and read her a bedtime story with what feels like genuine love in his voice.
And if you were that daughter, could you stop loving him even after you knew everything?
That is the tragedy. Some could, some couldn't. And that struggle defined the rest of their lives.
There's no neat bow to tie on this one. It's just the heavy weight of history. Thank you for listening to this deep dive.
Keep questioning.
See you next time.